As we work through all the free video tutorials of the Husqvarna Viking Onyx 25, we get to talking about buttonholes. And since I just had this close by, this is one of the Stitching Cosmos blocks and how we've used buttonholes in a totally different way. We've actually stitched them to weave ribbon in and out of them. So a fun way to realize that buttonholes aren't just for clothing. They could be used for other things like for drawstring bags, or where a drawstring for a pair of pants or shorts might come in handy for a young boy or any person whatsoever. But it's really kind of easy to do on this machine. So you are going to look for your buttonhole foot, and if you happen to know the size of button, if it is to be for an actual button that needs to go through it, you can take that button, open up the buttonhole foot from the back. So you're this is the front, and then this little side piece will open an area that you can put the button in. That will allow the machine to know how big of a buttonhole to create. So I'm going to just put this on the machine right now, and then we're going to talk about how to set it up. Now, right now, this thread is on top of the foot. I'm going to show you a way to kind of get it underneath the foot, or you can just start, and after you do one buttonhole, which we will always recommend that you do a test, then this thread will end up underneath the foot for buttonhole number 2. But if you do want to actually get it down, once we get the machine set up, I'm going to show you that. For settings, remember you can open up this handy dandy little chart to recognize which foot we're using, which this is foot C, what the tension should be at. So you could reduce the tension between 2 to 4. The stitch length, we need to reduce it down to 0.5, and the stitch width to 5. So I've already selected my buttonhole stitch on the stitch selection knob. We've reduced the stitch length somewhere between 0 and 1, and then on the top, change the stitch length to 5. So that's going to get us into the ballpark. But do keep in mind, you always want to test. You always want to have some stabilizer. Sometimes your fabric will be interfaced, so that's another thing to do. And so before I do the last step, which is very important, is there's a little lever right behind the needle threader to pull down. Right before I do that, if you just put your presser foot down on any part of your fabric, you can go ahead and take a stitch, and then watch this, lift up your presser foot, pull the bobbin thread up, and then pull both the threads down and out. That way they are underneath the presser foot to get started. So that's a quick way to kind of draw your top thread down below, and then you don't have to really hold on to it once you start. Do keep in mind that this buttonhole is going to travel away from us. So if your first buttonhole is going to be really close to the edge of your fabric here, well, that's not where you want it to be. It's going to be marked so it can actually travel in reverse and then finish up where you started. So I'm going to just slide this in a bit, lower the presser foot down. Find that lever. This is to activate the buttonhole stitch. But the last thing you have to do is actually push it towards the back of the machine, and it will stay pushed back. Do you see how that is? So as this travels around, it will actually travel back to that little part that's sticking out behind the buttonhole foot. And then when it reaches that, that's how long that buttonhole needs to be for the button that's in the back of your foot. Isn't that amazing? So let's just go ahead and stitch, and let's see what we get. So being that this is a mechanical machine, you're in charge of where the buttonhole needs to actually stop and finish up. But here's how it's going to start. It's going to sew up towards the back on the left side of the leg. You kind of heard the machine click, and that is when it turned around and is coming forward. So once again, you kind of saw where we started. That's where we actually need to stop sewing. So eventually the foot will no longer travel forward. But if you kind of peek down here, when those stitches kind of overlap where you started, there they are. You can bring the needle to the highest position, and let's just kind of slide this out. You can see that our buttonhole has been completely made. Now, you can now evaluate. Do you need or want the stitches closer together? If so, you can shorten the stitch length oh so slightly and try it once again. But when you go to stitch the second one, what you need to do is just take that little lever here and push it towards the back. See the difference? Now it's ready to start that buttonhole again. It knows to go ahead and start with the tack at the bottom, work its way around, and then you can do it. Let's go ahead and just stitch it once again. Now, once we have figured out how to stitch buttonholes, the next thing we need to do is figure out how to sew the buttonhole onto the fabric. That's going to be our next video that we're going to do. So let's just take a look, check out how these buttonholes are done. Actually, okay, yes, I did have some fun by selecting to do these in variegated thread. And yes, you can have some fun with buttonholes. They don't have to be boring buttonholes at all. But look how fun and easy those are to actually stitch. So next time your pattern calls for a buttonhole, know that this machine is completely able to do it. It is a one-step buttonhole. That's why it's called that. You just start it and then complete it, and then don't forget to put that little lever towards the back to do it again. When you're done with the buttonhole, what you want to do is go ahead and slide this all the way to the up position, kind of hide it back up where it belongs. The other thing that I usually tell my students to do is this. So I'm going to go ahead and take this buttonhole foot off. If it's hard to get it out because your fabric's a lot thicker, remember you can take the presser foot lifter and just kind of hold it up in the back, and that kind of makes it easy to get in and out if it's kind of hitting this foot on that part there. One thing I like to recommend is, because now that you've actually done this once, you might be like, oh, okay, how am I going to remember to do this in the future? One of the things you can do is store a spare button back here in this back area. That will be your reminder that, oh yeah, that's where my button goes. That will kind of give you an idea, and that you can kind of see that this is the front of the foot, and it'll kind of all come back to you. So at this point, I like to just take my buttonhole foot just like this, slide it. I always store mine in the back because that's just easier, and then that way it actually is all ready to go. Now, as we get ready to sew buttons on in the next video, we're actually going to do this without a foot. So grab a button and join us so you can see how easy it is to sew buttons on with a sewing machine.